actually don't know how to start this demo. And it's interesting because I've tried a bunch of different ways. I've tried to figure it out, but the simple fact is I've never done this demo before. And if I'm right, and I've been looking for it, I don't think anybody's done this demo before. This is a thing that I've been developing for the last few months, and I'd love to turn it into a full-size demo, a full comprehensive thing. For right now, it's something like a soft open. It's something like a movie trailer, just because I've never seen this technique before. I want to know how it resonates, and honestly, so many of the different advances that I've made as I've been wood turning has been from this group. So as early as possible, I wanted to get out here. I wanted to get everybody here involved. And so it's sort of a demo. It's kind of a sales pitch. Instead of asking you to buy something though, I'm asking you to buy in on this. I want to see if the way that I'm communicating this works well, if it leads to intuitive sphere turning like I'm hoping it will, and excuse me, and then I want to go from there, because normal sphere turning always has the same set of steps. You always end up turning close to a sphere. I know I've tried this with ornaments where you try and you get smaller and smaller and smaller, and then it looks like kind of a squashed oval, or it looks like you just need to find a new piece of wood. So to that extent, I have two just bottle stoppers that I'm going to pass around. This is a piece of cherry laurel, and you might not realize this, but this is actually a 3-inch in diameter sphere, or at least it started out that way, because I kept trying to make it a sphere and make it a sphere and make it a sphere. This one, on the other hand, is about the same size that I started with. So I'm going to pass these around, and the red one is the before and the yellow one is the after what I'm going to be working on today. Because very specifically, this doesn't involve rechucking, it doesn't involve cup chucks, it doesn't involve rotating it, and it doesn't involve any math, which is my favorite part. A lot of the time, I just get out and I just want to turn. I don't want to suddenly have to start solving logic problems and do algebra. I just want to be able to get out, have fun, and not think about it. And it might be some kind of hack, it might be some kind of thing, but hack is just about the only thing that it isn't. Because throughout this demo, the three main components of it are we're going to lie, we're going to cheat, and we're going to steal. And it actually all makes sense. So the background on this, because I want to go ahead and get started turning, is I started working on these, I guess headstock, these kinds of Stuart Mortimer style hollow form with a spiral fluted. It's pretty similar to what Sammy did for his demo in June, I think. And that led to going to this ball, which ended up taking a swat, but it's got beads on either side of it. So to get it completely spherical, there wasn't really anything that I could do to turn it this way normally and then rotate it, because as I made it smoother and smoother, these beads would have gotten lost. So the entire technique hinges around being able to turn this with it still on one single axis, so that you can have some sort of attachment piece. I know we don't do a lot of architectural turning around here, but as I get more into production turning, the idea of a null post with a ball cap on it, where it has to be able to fit into something else, or it has to be able to sit flat on something, this is where this really shines. So that's a lot of talking. I've been up for several hours and I haven't been turning, so this is an unusual day for me. Okay, I just mounted this back in. I trued this up on this chuck Thursday, and it's not bad, but even now, it's still not fully rounded. So every time I can, every time something gets remounted, I'm going to true it back up just as a good habit. And I finally broke down and bought a spindle rough and gouge specifically for this demo. UPS tells me it'll be here Monday.
Clayton,
Yes.
as to not being round, the wood may change a little bit, but when you rechuck anything, unless you are very, very precise about what jaw you put that back in, is going to be off. So what he's saying about re-rounding the piece, that happens every time almost. And some of the pros that you watch their videos, they say, oh, well, that turned out right. That's what they're talking about, that they rechucked it and it turned out, because usually it does not.
That is exactly right. The way that the fibers work when the jaw is clamped down on it, eventually when you release, the fibers want to decompress, and so they'll open back up. That's why anytime you hear another wood turner go, oh, that actually trued up nicely, you always hear it in form of surprise, because it even shocks them. So just to start out, I'm going to start by truing it up, just a habit that I want to get into. By truing it up, it's not even a perfect cylinder. It's just now not out of round. It's not going to be out of balance. I'm going to rotate this just a little bit. I have tear out over here. It's smooth over here. That's what I really enjoy about this kind of technique, is there are so many different things that don't need to be specific. I am kind of speeding through this section a little bit because the way that I turn spheres kind of follows every other sphere tutorial that you will find. It, you know, the phrase, every bit of philosophy is just a footnote to Socrates. It almost feels like every bit of wood turning is just a footnote to Richard Raffin. So this follows his method, where you start off with a cylinder, and if you look at it on a 2D plane, it's a square. And the way that you mark that out is you get the rough average diameter, and until the calipers just slip over. And then I'm going to grab a pencil. Actually, I'm going to grab a Sharpie so that it'll show up a little bit better. And then going from... Would you believe I didn't even practice that at home and I did it first try? So this point lines up here, and I'm going to line up with the inside of the caliper, make one little mark, spin it around, and now if I'm looking at this, it is a square. Inside this square is the sphere. These spring dividers are going to be the only tool that I have. There are a lot of different options for sphere turning. There's Alan Stratton has a lot of videos. There's Al Hockenberry, who he has some very specific formulas about this. There is Soren Berger, who is from New Zealand, who has a specific set of calipers for measuring out spheres. You take one measurement and then it orients it all so that you make all these same cuts And it does all the thinking for you, but you still have to do the different calculations. So to rough this out, I'm going roughly center. I'm not going to be too worried about it. I'm actually going to mark it with the divider. I'm just going to leave this little line. I'm not sure if it's showing up, so I'm going to add in that. And that's where center might be. I'm going to come from the other end. Hey, I got pretty close. I'm going to make another line. And somewhere between these two lines is where center is for me. So I'm just going to darken that in, and it's okay for the center line to have kind of a bigger mark. I'm going to do the same thing again, except I'm going to divide it in half. And for this one, I'm going to exaggerate it just a little bit so that it'll be kind of closer to there. And then whenever I mark over here, you can see a little bit bigger of a gap. Somewhere in the center of this, roughly about there, is where I'm going to make my next dividing mark. Once I have this one, like I said, I'm going to go through this part pretty quick because this is the same as just about every other technique. If I line up these two, and then I swap it over to here, and I swap it over to here, then I should be roughly in the center there. Yes, sir.
Are you breaking that up into fourths? So your square is into 4 sections?
So the square is now, it started out as a square, and the way that it's gotten marked out, I'm actually going to mark a little bit deeper for these. The way these go from a square to a sphere is by starting off just knocking off the corners. All of these angles, this outside part is just complete waste wood that will go away. All of this turns into an octagon. And that is probably about as far as everybody else's technique goes, where mine starts to diverge. There are measurements that you can do to figure out how to make this a perfect octagon. I don't want to do that. I don't want to think about things. There are different measurements that you can do. There are different sines and circle geometries and cosines and I don't know, I'm going on a tangent. Anyway, the main thing is you just want to knock off these corners. And the best way to do that is to take 45-degree cuts in. The Soren-Berger calipers will give you the measurement from the circumference in how far you have to go. I don't really think about that. I have a bowl gouge that is roughly around 45 degrees. So this is the first one out of the lie, cheat, and steal. All it takes is, instead of lining up the cut and doing all that, I'm going to lie the bowl gouge on the wrist with the flute completely closed. And I'm going to lie it onto the wood, still completely closed. As I raise the handle, it'll cut. And I'll just keep working my way backwards until I get to my line. And because it's going to follow the bevel, it's going to give me roughly 45 degrees. I'm going to do the same thing over here. That got angry. You know what? I'm actually going to clear some of this away. I knew I was going to be taking a big bite. That is a little bit bigger than I was expecting. I'm going to clean that up. Where the line goes, it would still be, I should have the dividers. I still have my lines here. So I'll mark out to here, and I still do technically have this pencil line here. And anything out past here, I'm not really worried about it because that's all going to go away anyway. So I'm going to part down to here, but you don't want to go too far because then the small stem of this will make this have a lot of vibration. It'll be difficult to cut. So what I do is once I get a rough 45, whatever this diameter is, I just kind of line it up a little bit. And then I'm going to part in here. And that does let me do an extra part that I was hoping to get to do. This parting tool was Charlie White's. So I'd been wanting to use it for a demo here for a while. The line has kind of disappeared here. I'm not worried about that. That's not a problem at all. I'm gonna grab bowl gouge again. I'm just gonna finish out this cut. It's rough up here. I don't have a problem with it because it's all going away eventually. So that is roughly our octagon. And this is where the math starts. I'm not looking forward to that. So I'm gonna skip it, all of it. This is something that I'm really excited about because there are all kinds of different numbers that go along with this. There are all kinds of different percentages, and there's actually a very specific formula that looks very scary. And so then you have different numbers where it is, there's a decimal point involved. So to go from here to here, or go from here to here, do this one or do that or whatever, you can remember the numbers 0.29758675309. I don't know. I don't want to remember that. Alan Stratton has his videos where he says he has the number saved in his phone. Al Hockenberry has 0.4017, and then afterwards it's a 0.1071 something. I don't know. Formula that I have, it's a really complicated number. You just got to remember 2. That's all it is. And there is a mathematical formula for it. The mathematical formula is, there's good. It's anywhere, it's the RBT formula. It's right about there. That's all you have to do. So there is a third section, and I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you. You gotta remember 2. You gotta go, yeah, right about there. And then the next one is little guy. That's it. You just take out the little guy first. So far what I've been doing is, as I've been looking at this as an octagon, that's been in a 2D plane. This is supposed to be a sphere, which is a 3-dimensional object. So as I take these dividers and I measure them out, it's 4 even sections all the way through, except it's not in 3D. So if I take these dividers, it's even thickness right here, but if we come around, you'll start to notice it's actually this and this are no longer even. But that is where the little guy comes in. So this is the smaller section, this is the bigger section. All you do, divide, that's not even in half. Doesn't matter because the line's right about there. You divide this in half, and then you go back to the magic number, 2. Once you have the little guy divided, line up the dividers, and then I'm going to come around and I'm going to mark the same distance from this guy to that guy. So it should give me a perfect and even high spot. And if you do the calculations for this and it's perfect and it's mathematical and everything, I'm pretty sure this line gives you that 0.4 something that Al Hockenberry does, because you're supposed to go about 40% down. I'm not quite there yet, but I guess it'd be a little bit further. I'm not worried about it. All I do is, like anybody trying to make something round, I'm just gonna use a straight tool. You don't have to worry about, oh, and I have to follow the curve, and oh, I have this bump or anything. This technique takes all of that math and all the nuance out of it. It just becomes knocking off the corners, and I mean, that's my favorite thing. Have you heard the phrase, whenever you try to cut a corner, you just make 2 more corners for yourself? This is actually what you want to do with this. So I'm just gonna That's it. That's the whole thing. So whenever you cut a corner, you create 2 new corners for yourself. So through all of this, the only thing that you got to remember is this middle line and then this point. At these extreme angles, the outside pieces of the sphere, those technically count as corners. It's the only weird thing that you're going to have to keep in mind. So as much as you do the different pieces of math, so there's this dividing, and then this one. So the line is roughly right about there. I'm going to spin. This is going to be a little bit bigger of a cut. And just to make sure it shows up on camera. All that goes away. And this may squeal. That's not bad. Now you've got this pretty extreme corner, which is not an issue. And there is a level of, you could do the rounded part with this, and you could divide this in half, but with this angle, this whole flat is pretty close to being straight on. So I'm just going to take the whole thing out. I'm going to switch to a spindle gouge so that I'm not scraping the entire thing. So you want bigger and bigger angles until you have no angles. The ultimate goal is to get this from a square to an octagon to a hexadecagon, which is a 16-sided shape. And then I don't know what's after that. You keep dividing it, and then once I realized there's 16, there's a octagon, there's a hexadecagon. By the time I got past that, I realized all my patience is gone. So I'm going to measure, I'm going to divide right in half. I'm going to measure. I'm going to measure. I'm just going to take another big cut all the way through there. And like the other one, I don't really want to think too much about this, so I'm just going to scooch up to that line. But the concept there is just step and repeat all the way through. I have this big flat, well, I have this corner, but I have this, and now I'm just going to eyeball it. So from here to here, and then I'll have this one. So measuring from here to here gets me about there. I'm just going to keep going. And I'm just going to keep working my way through this because there's not really a need to measure. There's about halfway to there. And so then I'm going to fill that in. So once you get into the rhythm of it, it really is just taking off all the high spots. Technically this is a high spot between here and here. So I'm going to go here to here. There's a little high spot here. So I'm going to go from there to there. There's a little shoulder there. At this point, the things are so small that it's really not worth stopping, measuring, dividing. I'm just going to Move the light a little bit. I'm just going to knock off the high spot. 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 I left myself a corner. And it's just this series of straight cuts that eventually become kind of a sphere. A bunch of really small things. And I'm not trying to, oh, my geometry. Oh, this angle has to be correct. I just see a high spot. I'm just slowly knocking off, taking off the high spot, taking off the high spot, taking off the high spot. I do still have this one up here. This one I'm going to mark halfway between. And there's another shoulder. And that's really it. Generally, I would suggest you only do the front side first and then come back for the back. This whole technique is so that you can have something else attached, but depending on how I'm doing on time, it'll be okay. I may actually try to part all this off because I also have some digital calipers where I like taking these off to see how close I am. And in some of the ones that I've tried, this one, for example, has probably warped a little bit, but whenever I measured it this way, this way, this way, basically anything, it was about 5/1000ths out of round. And I didn't have to do cup chucks. I didn't have to do anything other than a little bit of sanding, which I'm going to do now. So, first step, lie the tool on the piece and then cut, follow the bevel to make the cut. Second part, there are all these different mathematical formulas. We're going to cheat and we're just going to use the lines that are already there to help illustrate whatever or visualize whatever we're trying to cut away. The last thing, lie, cheat, and steal. There's a technique that fabricators make, that 3D modelers make, that people who are trying to design a new product make, or that they do. That if they want a specific tolerance for something, if they want, oh, I want this buckle on this thing to fit like this buckle on that thing, they'll just go take that buckle and they just put all the things together to make a prototype. And it's called stealing a tolerance. It's called stealing a fit. With this is Klingspor, yeah, cloth back sandpaper, and it has, if I get the pressure just right, it has enough rigidity to hold into a perfect circle. And there's enough rigidity in it that it just springs back. I like that. I like that there's something that I already have that makes a circle for me, so I don't have to think about it. All it takes is borrowing the tolerance for this, borrowing that this wants to be in a even perfect arc. I'm going to do one thumb on the bottom, one thumb on the top, and with the lathe spinning a little bit slower. It's about 1600. I'm going to take this and I'm just going to twist it, and that'll give me the curve. I'm actually going to speed it up. And I don't know if it's going to show up on camera, but as I'm watching it, I'm seeing all those high spots disappear. And it can go a little bit awry if you have heartwood and sapwood together, because the sapwood will sand a little bit faster. That is a really somewhat even hemisphere, half circle, half sphere. And the majority of the time, whenever I'm sanding, I don't want to sand completely up to the line to have it disappear. I lucked out this time in that it didn't, but if this line ever does disappear, take spring dividers, line it up with from this point to this point, because that's our original quadrants, and get a little bit, there we go. And then whenever I need to put it back, this line is now still wherever the quadrant is. So I can get my line back if you don't try to start knocking off the corners over here first. But since that line is still there, we're going to start knocking off the corners over here next. I'm going to get rid of this jagged edge just because I don't like it. This essentially tenon has maintained the rigidity across here for a really long time, but I don't really need it anymore. So I'm going to take it down by maybe about half. I want it enough that I can see where I'm curving, but not so small that it's going to wobble. And from there, we have this corner and this corner. And I've been doing enough of these that I get to the point where I can kind of just eyeball it. And that's not even right, but it doesn't matter because I'm just gonna move the line over a little bit, and right about there, that looks good. I've got this here, it's, I don't know, 3/16 maybe, a little bit over, so a 1/4 inch. So then I just come over from here, a 1/4 inch over. And that's actually probably pretty close to the 40% that Al Hockenberry talks about. Just to keep a good visual on here, and darken that in before I remove all that I just put on there. I need to quit doing that. So again, I'm just lining the bevel down, and I'm just pushing in just a complete straight cut. And I left a little ridge there that's not actually a corner. There's this guy working from the most extreme corner down. I'm having to sight, just because I'm going to be parting this completely off, I'm having to sight that in about the center of here is where I would be. So from this corner, if I go by the little guy rule, then I've got just a little bit there. I'm gonna cut in here. And then it's just step and repeat all the way through. I'm gonna give myself a little bit more room. This is why I like working with pecan or something, because the harder it is, the smaller the little foot you can get away with. So now I have this big corner and that, so I'm essentially dividing by 2, but it's not an even division. And that's why you always side with the little guy. You go with the underdog. Again, anywhere where I see that it's basically flat, I'm just going to make flat.
Clayton, at this point, when you have a really small tenon holding it there, is when most of us experience a lot of vibration. Would it not be helpful to have a cup center and the tailstock brought up at that point?
You could, you absolutely could. A lot of what I want to do is have an area where the foot is, and I'm not really sure what the exact ratio would be, because this is a much softer wood. This is actually part of the root ball, so it's going to be even softer than a normal tree, or a normal trunk. But the idea of this is that you have some kind of foot to it. So me coming in all the way down like this usually won't be the case. But for this demo, I want to get as close as I can. I'm going to part the entire thing off. But yes, otherwise you want to stick with about half the total diameter of whatever the cylinder is. I'm going a little bit less because this is a particularly rigid wood. If it was something softer, then it could definitely introduce vibration. So it's less of a, oh, it won't introduce vibration, and more of a, depending on which species you use, you can sidestep the vibration. This is, if I'm coming from the center, then I'm measuring this little guy to that little guy. I'm actually going to switch to a smaller gouge just to be able to get in here. So now I have that corner that I'm going to do small corner, match it over here. Leaving me with a bigger one. I'm going to clear some of this material out. So now I have this big angle, so I'm going to go here to here, measuring from the small one, and just adding 2 lines. Now I have a high spot here. I'm just going to slowly work my way down, same as I did before. And each one is just a straight and or flat cut. And it's actually a little bit wobbly here, but that's because as I'm working my way back, I'm going to get here to here, and I'm going to start working from the top, and that's what's going to refine the shape. Come in a little deep. So straight cut, knocking off the high point, knocking off the high point. Try to knock off this high point. Knock off the high point, knock off the high point, knock off the high point. In case you can't tell, I've started to try to knock off the high points.
Clayton.
Yes, sir.
So, I know none of y'all ever have a catch, but if I were to have a catch at this point, how recoverable is it? Is it just simply making your sphere smaller?
I'm scared to do that. So, like what I just did here. Okay, so there. Take your straight tool. Actually, I'm going to stop. I'm going to see what damage I did. It's not bad. It's recoverable, but it's deeper than I want it to be. Wherever this is, I'm glad you brought this up. This is roughly the corner that I was about to start working with, and roughly the corner where I was about to start working with. So these 2 high points, I'm going to come in, and I'm just going to make a flat in between them. Now that I have a flat, I have this corner and this corner again. And this might end up throwing off the perfect eccentricity of this, because if you go down here, you may need to end up making the overall thing smaller. But it usually, with this method, it's not going to be all that much. Like the bottle stopper that I passed around, it started off really big and I kept whittling away. This lets you line back up with where you were trying to go, so you lose the minimal amount of wood. But now that I have this, and this is, it's curved, but it's essentially a flat because of how curved it's gotten. So I'm going to add this back in. Well, now I'm just back to the exact same thing that I was doing before. There's this to here, and so between the two, I'm going to measure about halfway, and for however much that is, maybe about 5/16 something, I'm just going to take all this away. Okay, so now this part will be a little bit smaller and a little bit off for this, but with 2 cuts, that first one to take away a lot of the material, and then there's this one, I'm not super far off from getting back on track. I have my corners to knock off the high spots. Go and do this one. There's a smaller gap here and a bigger gap here, so I'm going to take that down. Same thing, I can even leave that little line in there because between these two it'll be there. And then if we assume this center point to this corner, it's about right there. Actually, that corner. So then, see, and this is the part where in the middle, and can I do this? Do that. If I line this up in the center, and I have this corner, that is a straight line. That sort of is there. So then, from here, I have this corner. I'm going to line up there, well, as I'm seeing it there. And I think I can get away with making this the new center, the new end point of this. So to decrease the overall, once you decrease the overall diameter, and I'm just guessing, but I feel like I'm going to be pretty close with that. All I'm doing is moving where this end point would be over a little bit to simulate the smaller diameter of the overall piece. So I'm going to cut in. 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 And I still have kind of an egg shape up here. So to get rid of this center line, I'm going to divide across here and across here. Make one final cut. Go from here to here, and here to here. And it looks like I'm not going to get a complete 1/2 of a sphere and then 1/2 of a different sphere on here. But this would typically be the point where I sand. And I'm going to get this one little spot out that is a little bit higher corner than the others. And as I get rid of one corner, I keep finding more. I'm going to go ahead and make a mark right on center so that I know where one half was and then the other half was. And then just going for sanding. As I'm getting these high spots out, this kind of looks like an eyeball. Just in time for Halloween.
Clayton, what grit were you using?
That's just 180. It's going to leave, you could go a little bit more aggressive with 120, 150, but I have 180. And it leaves not a bad surface finish. It's enough that you can see exactly what you're kind of trying to get at. And even with the catch, even if with the recovery, it looks like it's going to be a full curve. I'm gonna bring this down just a little bit more. I'm just gonna, I bet that one will actually sand out. Nope. Okay, I'm already making it a little bit smaller, so that's a spiral decoration in there. Definitely not a catch. Okay. All it would really take to be able to turn this into a completed sphere is, actually, I've never really had to problem solve, so you're watching this happen as I'm trying to do problem solving live, is take down this middle part. If you take down this middle part, I'm mostly just trying to keep an eye on the time. if you take down this middle part until it is the right diameter, you know what? I'm going to try it. I have no idea if this is going to work, and if it doesn't, then that'll be the end of the demo anyway, and, I mean, then there's chili. Nothing can go wrong. So I'm going to add this in. Yeah, that's right. There's not much of a tenon. So I'm going to go even smaller. And these are curved, so if I put this on here, it's not going to have a sharp point to dig in. But all I'm going to look to do now is wherever that was, I'm just going to make a little flat for myself. And then, it's not completely flat. And then I'm going to spend the rest of the time just knocking off the corners. I'm not even going to try to get it exactly perfectly right. Because then ideally, okay, I know I said I'm not going to get it perfectly right, but once you get into the groove of just knock off the corner, it just becomes fun. All right, and if I sand one last time, and with this, instead of just doing here, I'm going to go all the way around. And I'm missing one small corner over here that I'm going to hope I can take out. You'll see the lines show up that are the different high points and low points. There's a little corner here and a little dip here, but other than that, that's not bad for trying to recover immediately from with something that I hadn't actually really tried. I'm going to hold on to it as I'm coming across because it is going kind of fast. And I'm going to go down just a little bit more, a little bit more. And I want to leave a little nub on there. And besides this corner that I really didn't want to take the time to sand, you just sand off the little nub. And the ultimate test is if you can roll this on a flat surface, like the floor, and it rolls in a straight line, then you've got an even sphere. But the floor isn't even, so I feel like that's skewed against me, so you're just gonna have to trust me that this is a perfect sphere. And that's it. Did I do okay on time? It's not bad. Let's eat some chili.
Clayton, I see you got some spheres there behind you.
I do.
Which I was thinking, when you got down to that nub, when it got kind of dangerous, you could stop there. When you set it up like that, you can't really, it doesn't matter if it's a perfect sphere or not if you decorate it the way you've decorated those. So this is another option that you've got. And Alan Stratton did decorating with the spheres. I saw him at SWAT. He actually cut lines through them, like your spiral, for instance, and embellished it quite a bit. But he did a sphere. He didn't do it on a base like that. But by doing it on a base, you have it attached to the lathe, and you can do a lot of stuff with it without having to steady it. So this is another option out of this same demo that you've got things that you can do with a sphere.
That's the thing that I really like about this isn't a revolutionary technique. This is iterative at best. Wood turning has been around since, I think the earliest examples were 1300 BC. So we've got some history. And all this is just a new way of doing this that I hadn't seen before from different techniques and areas where they might not have been in sources of inspiration for anybody else. So even with this corner in here, if I just measure this based on how it would have been in the lathe, and then I zero out the calipers, and then I rotate it, I'm actually going to swing it a little bit just to skip the catch. At a diagonal, this is roughly 0.022 inches out of round, which is 3/32 of an inch. And if you take out the corner, then I've gotten some of these down to 5/1000 of an inch, which is a little bit less than a 64th of an inch. And no cup chucks, no jigs, no anything, just spindle gouge. Nothing that is going to, oh, I have a sphere turning jig that turns around. And then however many hundreds of dollars it costs, it sits in the drawer the rest of the time. This is just spindle gouge, this is just pencil, this is just spring dividers and calipers that I use on all kinds of things when I'm sizing out tendons and everything else anyway. So hopefully it's efficient enough.
You know, if you use the jig, congratulations to the guy that made the jig.
Exactly. There's Carter, not Carter and Sons, but Carter, that they make bandsaw guides and all that kind of stuff. I think they were the first ones to make the turning jig. I priced it out before this demo. If you got the complete kit, this entire sphere could be yours for only $845. And the rest of the time, it sits in a drawer, it sits in a box, and that $1,000. Do you know what you could get for $1,000? For almost $1,000? You could get a mini lathe. You could almost afford a Sammy Long poster if it's autographed. But there are just so many other things that you can get. I didn't know if that joke was going to work, but this is the crowd to do it with.
Thank you so much, Clay.
Absolutely.
You did a wonderful job.
If you have on a smaller sphere, have you ever used a round pipe to round your sphere?
I have, sort of. It makes a horrible noise, and the thing that I've actually gotten that works better is, and this isn't the one, a third of a PVC pipe. You put some Velcro in here, the stick-on Velcro, and then you can put your sanding pads in here.
What I'm talking about is you can if you want to turn a 1-inch sphere,
Mm-hmm.
you can take a pipe that's 1 inch inside, a metal pipe, and sharpen it all the way around.
Yes.
Then you can take that pipe and turn the speed down a little bit, and push that pipe on it, and rotate the pipe around like this. And all of a sudden now you've got a 1-inch sphere, absolutely perfect.
So you can have the sharp edge, absolutely, and I have tried that. You can also put a round sandpaper disc in it, and that'll smooth it over and keep it a perfect circle. I didn't bring it with me, but you can cut off a PVC pipe that's whatever diameter you need, and you can match it. You can just set it on the sphere, and wherever you see high spots or wherever you see light coming through, that's how you know that you don't have a perfect circle. But the goal of this is just like cup chucks, just like those things. If you have, like, I used a hole saw and just knocked off the corners. Now I have 4 of them, one at 2 inches, one at 2.5, one at 3, and all of those now just sit in a drawer. So there's got to be, the more that I get into production turning, the more that I am following the phrase, there's got to be a lazier way to do this. Sorry, there's got to be a more efficient and cost-effective way of doing this. And this is what I've come up with because I want drawers empty. I have probably a dozen cup chucks of different sizes because I'm turning different diameter things. So yes, I've tried it, and as much as I can work towards them not being necessary, I'm going to keep aiming for that. But as you're trying to figure out the different, this method works for me. It's not going to work with everybody, and that one is a spectacular way because if you get the hole saw sharp enough, then you're scraping it, you're shear scraping it. You get a really clean edge off of it too. So no, it's a great way to do it. I just am trying to work back how many jigs and how many fixtures I have to use at any given time.